Hello, Cinefans. I'm Kendall Krufer, and this is Watching Classic Movies. My guest is Christopher S. Connelly, author of Helen Morgan, the original Torch singer, and Ziegfeld's Last Star. Morgan was a hugely popular and influential singer and actress who set the template for musical theater performance style. We talked about Morgan's big heart, her deeply emotional connection with audiences, and how her approach to life was more Auntie Mame than as the downtrodden songstress she has typically been rumored to be. Welcome, Christopher. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
I love the way that Helen Morgan described herself in a newsreel as a piano sitter and song singer. It's such a humble way to describe herself. Mm-hmm. And I also particularly love the way that Texas Guinan, you mentioned this in the book, talked about how Morgan begins where others leave off, which leads to the question, how do you describe Helen Morgan to others?
She was the original Torch singer. In a way, she was the first crooner. That may be a better way of putting it. The amazing thing, she did this all by herself. She had very little training. She trained for opera. She had a small voice, but she figured out how to use her deficits to her advantage. In an era where people like Jolson, sold the song and they pushed out, she brought people into her. Because she has such a small voice, she made people lean forward and pay attention to what she was saying. And she acted her lyrics and really paid attention to them, perhaps for the first time. Around the first time that the Rudy Bell and then later Bing Crosby and Muscolombo and others that did as well. But she acted them, she lived them. And people had never experienced that before. And then later in Shogo, she brought what she had learned into that. And that was really the first time that what we would call musical theater acting, what we get from Patti LuPone and Angela Lansbury, people like that, that's really where that started. I mean, obviously other people, built upon what she began and added to it and made it deeper and more varied. But, she's kind of ground zero of what we know as musical theater acting and singing today.
So she was pioneering in a lot of ways then. And I think one interesting way is the way that she acts a song and how that's a part of what draws in her audience. Could you speak a little bit to how she acted a song and what she did in that kind of fashion of singing?
She was honest. I think that's the best way of putting it. She didn't sentimentalize anything. What she felt was real. When she sang about, someday I'm going to find the man that I love, and at the same time, it's hopeful, but there's that little bit of tragic foreboding underneath it. In her best known song, in Bill, what's really amazing about that, it's at heart, it's a comic love song. It's very similar to You'd Be Surprised, the Irving Berlin standard from the teens. It's, I love this guy. He's kind of a dweeb. He has nothing to recommend him, but I love him anyway. But what she did when she sang it in Showboat, and, we later learned that her husband has left her, that she's transferring that, this love for this character, Bill, onto her husband. And now it has a subtext of tragedy. And that's what makes the song so interesting and so moving.
Yeah, it's interesting that you should mention the honesty, because there was a part where you were talking about how she sang with a sob in her voice for real. Mm-hmm. But then she realized the effect, and from going on, it was a part of her act. So there's kind of a mix of kind of a showmanship that dovetails with her honesty. It's maybe in some ways a bigger honesty because she plays up a thing that came from reality.
No, that's a fair way of saying it, yes.
Yeah.
She had horrible stage fright. I mean, a lot of the greats did do to the point that, I mean, she would just be trembling. But she realized that people responded to that. So she's like, I'm not going to try to hide it. I'll just incorporate that into the character that I'm presenting, particularly in her nightclub work. When I'm up there on the piano, there's jittery hands. I'm going to use that, and the quiver in the voice. I'm going to use that. I'm not going to try to conquer that. And try to use that dramatically and incorporate that into the character that I'm portraying or creating.
And I think that we're fortunate that we can see that in her films.
Yes,
Seems
right.
several of them. You'll have these scenes where you're watching people watch her. It's almost as intriguing as her performance. The way they're just gutted. I don't believe I've ever seen anything like that. Maybe in a stage performance, but I don't know that I've seen that kind of reaction in a film performance before, where they really are as sad as she seems to be in singing this song. And a good comparison to that, I think, is seeing Ruth Etting in a film. Is always enjoyable. She's great on the screen. She's fun. It's cute, but it doesn't get you in your guts the way that Helen Morgan does.
Ruth Etting, they called her the happy singer of sad songs. And I think Helen Morgan was the opposite. She was
Right.
a sad singer of happy songs. Again, as I said with Bill, you had that general optimism on the top of it, but underneath of that was this undercurrent of unease and tragedy. And Ruth Etting, she would, start off, sad, and then, the second chorus, she would do it upbeat again.
Yeah.
Much like Barbra Streisand singing "My Man" at the end of "Funny Girl." That's sort of what Ruth Etting was doing. It's like, no, I'm an American. I'm optimistic. I'm all this, and she triumphs over this adversity. Whereas Helen Morgan goes in the opposite direction.
Yeah, like I've lived and I've loved, but I'm still sad. I'm still sad. And it's funny because usually that kind of emotion I don't respond to. It feels manipulative. You know how she's got the corners of her mouth turned down and just the quavering voice. And I guess because she feels it so fully and commits to it so completely, I give her a pass or something. It's really interesting. So and so about her film performances, I guess it's hard to talk about it. For one, a lot of the best parts are just her singing a song in a scene, something like that. And then for the other, there's one that's just so obvious. I mean, Showboat is clearly one that stands out, whether or not it's one's favorite performance. What kind of moves you about her performance in Showboat?
The tricky thing about playing Julie is, and why it's somewhat controversial today, is the character is this woman of color who was able to pass as white, who was found out about it, spoiler alert, and the tragedy that unfolds because of that. And I've seen several women of color play it on stage, and they're beautiful and they're talented and they sing it well, but they walk on the stage and you're like, look at this beautiful Black woman. It's when it's revealed, it's supposed to be a shock to the audience, and it's not. With Helen Morgan, you're tiptoeing around the racial part of it. But what she did, and I've never really seen anybody else do it the same way, she played it just as tragedy, as hubris, that she's, going along, no, I've got this covered. I don't have to worry about it. And then all this tragedy unfolds. So what Edna Ferber wrote was very much closer to what Ava Gardner did in the remake. She was this very earthy, kind of broad, and every time that the riverboat played the town in which she grew up, she would get sick. And that way she never went on. She was never discovered. And then this one time it is. And you don't get that in the musical, and you don't get that in Helen Morgan's performance. And I think that adds another layer to it. It makes it very interesting.
I hate to say this about anybody acting, but it feels a little bit like there's a lot of her in this role, especially in the way that she kind of wants to go on a bender at the end. Though that wasn't exactly the way she consumed alcohol. I mean, do you see any parallels there, or do you feel it's not quite there?
Um, there are elements, certainly. She was, when the role was written, she was not quite as heavy a drinker as she became. So maybe more of a case where, the character took over her as opposed to she, committed, became more the character, if that's a decent way of saying it.
I find it complex, her relationship with alcohol and the way that she used it. I don't fully understand what happened there. I guess you can't always entirely, but there was a passage where you were talking about how somebody else observed that she did better drinking the brandy, which I find a little devastating. Is that just the stage fright?
The stage fright. And I think part of her appeal to the men in the audience, there was that little girl lost feeling about her, that she was this helpless thing that they all wanted to protect. And then to the women, she was this very glamorous woman that they all aspired to be. And I think the alcohol contributed to that, particularly for the little girl lost persona. And she's just a little bit dreamy, a little bit just slightly off kilter, but still able to sing beautifully. The amazing thing with her and relationship with alcohol is when she drank, the first thing that went were her motor skills. Her knees would buckle and she would wobble a little bit. So sitting on top of a piano, that steadied her. And she could go much, much further. She could drink much, much more and still sing beautifully. So, diction would be perfect and the performance would be wonderful. But you just had that little bit just underneath the surface.
That was one thing I found kind of simultaneously remarkable and heartbreaking about a few passages in the book where she's just being propped up literally on stage, where they adjust the staging just so that she can keep going, but she's just so inebriated at the same time. Did she have anything in her that wanted to stop? Or was this just a life that she had this was how she was going to live her life and she didn't reflect upon it?
By the time it became so problematic that it was affecting her career, she knew she was addicted. She knew it was a sickness. She was nihilistic about it. This is just the way it is, and I'll just go out swimming.
Yeah, she just did her best to do the most she could with the time that she had, kind of a thing.
But I want to emphasize that while she had these episodes earlier in her career where she did need to be propped up, they were very rare. She almost never missed performances. She almost never, most of the time she knew, where that line was, how to drink just enough. So again, that she would sparkle,
right,
but not enough that she would risk the production, risk the lives of the well-being of all the other people who were employed, especially during the Depression. She knew that jobs were getting harder to come by, and if she acted up, everybody was out of a job.
But I looked upon her as somebody very strong because she did know that she needed to perform, but also I saw that as her having a sort of empathy for the people around her and a feeling that she needed to be professional and responsible and help others. It seems that her generosity was very widespread. The gifts that she would give, that she wanted to care for others, including, a child of an associate. What was behind kind of the extreme nature of her generosity? The way that somebody would admire a coat and she'd just take it off her shoulders and give it to them.
It began in her childhood. She had a very severe inferiority complex. If you know the musical Lady in the Dark, that was fairly similar. Her mother was gorgeous, blonde hair, blue-eyed, and all of her mother's sisters were also gorgeous. And then here comes Helen, who's a brunette and has what she considered wishy-washy eyes, and she was considered an ugly child. And so she always felt that she wasn't good enough. I have to be better. I have to be better. And if she saw anybody else suffering, she had such empathy for them because she was going through that. It's like, no, I have to stop this. Here, take this. It'll make you feel better. And so that just grew and grew. And then when she became successful, and particularly when the Depression came in, she was like, here I am dripping in furs, and all these people, they're literally starving. What can I do to help them? So it was just anytime she saw anybody, yes, here's $1 here, and particularly people in your profession. Here's $20 to tide you over. Here's a Coke. Here's dinner. Here's whatever she could do to help them.
Yeah, this wide breadth of ways that she would serve others. Yeah, and speaking of her relationship with people that she worked with, I wondered how much applause would I consider to be one of her best performances too. How much that was like her real personality, a sort of mothering feel, I guess is what I'm.
Part of that inferiority complex as an adult was that for whatever reason she could not bear children, and she desperately wanted them. So she became mother to the people that she worked with.
She found a way.
Even people who were older than she was, she still became the mother hen to them.
So going back to Applause, what are your feelings about that film performance where she's centered as opposed to a specialty and where it really is her film in a lot of ways?
I've showed, I think, from a technical standpoint, is a more polished performance. In Applause, she's learning how, in real time, how to act for the camera. And the amazing thing is she's being directed by Ruben Mamoulian, and that was his first film. He's learning how to direct for the camera, and he's teaching her how to act for the camera at the same time. And it's a very raw performance. From a technical standpoint, there's several things that are wrong, but oh boy, is it powerful. She's just fully committed to what she's doing. I would like to think that had Paramount put it into wide release before the end of 1929, that film would have ended up on a lot of 10 best lists, and she might have gotten an Oscar nomination out of it.
I wondered about that.
It's really good. And so it's still very much, Applause is still very much an early talkie. So by the time we get into films that were released later in 1930, again, they're a little bit more polished, and the acting is a little bit more polished. So she was kind of like right in the, if it could come out a couple months earlier, she would have gotten into the 28-29 season. It's just hit just kind of in the wrong spot.
It's interesting to me because there are so many things that are appealing and complain about that performance that are evergreen. Mm-hmm. That you almost, it's really, there's so many movies from 1929 that are just painful to watch, that don't grab you at all. And of course, this is the director too, pushing things to the limits as far as what you could do with a sound film, and that is very groundbreaking. But I think it's interesting that it could be this artifact that is just about Mamoulian, innovating, and yet it's her performance that really is memorable and has lasted over time. Do you find any of her other films compelling as far as the way that she performed as an actress?
She had very few opportunities as an actress in film, unfortunately. She's very, very good in Go Into Your Dance. It's an unusual role for her. She plays the heavy, and it's very much a supporting role. But when she's on screen, she's right up there with everybody else in that Warner Brothers stock company. And there's a reaction shot of her at the very end of her performance, and she's cold, and you don't expect that from Helen Morgan. She's a killer. She's ruthless, and it's kind of shocking and very believable.
Yeah. It's true. I don't see that in her often, but okay, I don't think Frankie and Johnny is a good movie, but there's moments just of silent acting in that where I see the same quality. Her face looks like a Roman statue. And and she's just gliding along and you feel yourself tapping into something that's not really being presented in the film, if that makes sense.
The problem with Frankie and Johnny, it's so cut up what survives, and there's so much we don't know what was cut. That's what we do know is that in the original cut of the film of the footage that was shot in 1934, we do apparently see her gun down Johnny, and you don't see that in the release print today. So again, her big scene we don't get to see. So it's really hard to judge that performance as a performance. You just, I think you have the right idea. You take what little glimpses you can see out of it for what it is, and be grateful we at least have that.
It should have been a pre-code.
It would have been, it would have been the last pre-code and a spectacular pre-code.
It's just, yeah.
But again, it was a independent production. It came out right at the end. Had there been a major studio behind it, they might have, pushed it into the theaters in time, but it didn't happen.
I just feel like there are things like there's a scene where the proprietor of the club drops a hanky
Yes.
to indicate it's time to cut loose on somebody, her gunman. Just things like that it are great about it, but the thing that makes it like, oh man, what it could have been, it is her performance. Are there any other performances? I mean, I guess both the singing and the acting that really stand out to you in her films.
Well, those are her four big, meaty performances.
Right.
She also has a large role in Roadhouse Nights. She's not very good in it. It's kind of a missed opportunity. Again, she's still learning her way for the camera, and I think she was expecting her director to be another Mimoyan, and he wasn't. So she kind of floundered in spots, which is a shame. But again, it's another one of those films. There are a couple of silent bits of acting, some reaction shots. It's like, oh yeah, okay, there she is, and then she kind of goes back behind the cloud for a little bit more.
Right. She just can't help but be compelling.
Yes.
It's like you could even maybe attempt to suppress it and it would come out. And I think it's so interesting that it comes out. I mean, the idea of her being an acting singer makes so much sense because there's just movements that come out, like the way she uses her hands.
She started out as a dancer. She was very much aware of her body. And I think that you see bits and pieces of that in her film work.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense then.
And one of the nice things about Applause is you get to see her dance for a little. And so it's like, oh, if only we could have seen more of Helen the dancer, that would have just added to what she could bring to the team.
That she could have done a full-fledged musical starring role. Yeah. Well, that's interesting you say that about her dancing because there's a moment in Showboat that always gets me. It's at the beginning where they have the parade and they're showing these men down below admiring her while she's up in the carriage. And she just gently puts her hand out behind her. So you only see her hand kind of gracefully floating out while these men are looking up at her. And it's just so her for that little moment to be so engrossing. So the dancing thing makes that moment make more sense to me, that she just was in touch with her body in a way and what she was saying. And it's funny actually about the whole hand thing, because I was thinking that watching, oh gosh, what was it? You Belong to Me. She's singing and I'm like, oh, there she goes with the hands again. And then the little boy watching her says something about the way she's moving and look at her hands. And I'm like, yeah, see, it's not just me. So yeah, it's very entrancing the way that she moves.
Another thing, Helen realizing an asset and taking advantage of it. She had perhaps the two most beautiful hands in the business during that era. Very much commented upon how beautiful her hands was. And so she, again, incorporated that into the act, the gestures with her hands and make sure that people saw them and how expressive they could be.
So in some way that was deliberate then.
Yes. But again, but I think that also came from that dancer's background as well.
Just an innate, physical gracefulness.
Yeah.
It's
Graceful
complicated.
and this is beautiful. So, sort of combining those two elements.
And she really was beautiful. I know that's part of the appeal. She looked like Snow White.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Alabaster skin against that very, very dark hair. Which
Yeah.
is really stunning.
But not a traditional romantic heroine kind of beautiful. It was sort of something slightly removed, as warm as she was. I guess what I'm trying to say is she was unique. There was really no one who had this combination of skill and just charismatic appeal and beauty. So, is there anything else that you would like people to know about Helen Morgan?
I think the biggest thing she had in life. We look at her as this tragic figure. She had her problems, she had her demons. I think what caused her to drink is what ultimately killed her. But she was brilliant. She had a very, very fast wit, loved puns. And again, you don't get to be the most beloved or one of the most beloved people in the business if you're just miserable all the time.
Right.
When she was off stage, I mean, she was Auntie Mame. I mean, she was just, she was the life of the party. She had a joke and something nice to say to everybody, and which also made her a good prohibition hostess. She was able to glad hand everybody and how are you doing and let's have a drink, and she was always good company.
I think Auntie Mame is a fantastic way of putting it.
Yes.
As you write her life, and you write it beautifully, I have to add. This is a beautifully written book. I reread some moments because they were so nice to read. But the overwhelming feeling is that she was celebrating life. And I think that's a very important takeaway from the book.
Thank you.
Well, Christopher, it was wonderful to talk to you about Helen Morgan. I hope people will listen to this and understand what a rich life this was, that, there were struggles, but for the most part, it's an absolutely amazing, wonderful, creative life. And I thank you so much for sharing with me.
Thank you again for inviting me. This was a lot of fun.
Go to watchingclassicmovies.com for more information about Christopher's book, Helen Morgan, the original Torch singer, and Ziegfeld's Lost Star. Please rate and review the show wherever you listen. I appreciate your support. Thank you for listening. This is Kendall Cruver, watching classic movies. Until next time.